Look, we've all been there, the end of the year, fast approaching, you haven't met your reading goal yet. So here are 20 short books that are excellent and will help you meet your reading goal this year. Hey guys, hope you're doing well. Like I mentioned in the intro, this video is going to be me recommending 20 books that are short. I'm talking under 250 pages, and all of these books get my stamp of approval and my recommendation. Now, if you've been around a very long time, which not many of you have, then about 2 years ago, at the very beginning of my BookTube channel, I made a video that was exactly this, where I recommended 20 books that were under 250 pages that were going to help you reach your reading goal. That being said, I read a lot of short books, so in the past 2 years, I've read a lot more books that are under 250 pages. So today, I will be recommending 20 more books that are under 250 pages. So yes, that means if you go back and watch my original video, which I will leave linked down below, you will get 20 different books recommended to you than the 20 that you'll see in this video. So we're not gonna beat around the bush here though. I'm gonna go ahead and jump into these books. I don't have them organized in any specific genres. That being said, there is something for everyone here. I've got some fantasy recommendations, science fiction, literary fiction, historical fiction, short stories, graphic novels, you name it. So make sure to stick around to the end of the video where I will be telling you what my top 5 recommendations are of the 20 books that I talk about in this video. Without any further ado though, let's jump into the recommendations. First up, we have the first book that I ever truly loved and the first book that ever really broke my heart, and that is Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rawls. If you don't know what happens in this book, maybe don't read it, because then you won't have to know what I know and suffer the way that I have suffered. This is an amazing story though. This is the story of a young boy coming of age. He really wants to be a part of this hunting community in his town, and so he desperately wants these 2 dogs, and he eventually gets them, and it's about his bond with these creatures and him growing up and learning about responsibility and love and friendship and sacrifice, and it is just, oh my gosh, this novel is incredible, and I cannot wait to reread it. It has been far too long, and just making this video really makes me want to read this again. So maybe I'll start 2024 off with a reread of Where the Red Fern Grows. Speaking of pain, we have The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This is a novel that I read this year in 2023, and it was actually I think this was the second book that I gave 5 stars to, and I read it in April. So it was a tough start to the year, but this book truly helped to break into that amazing reading year status for 2023. The Bell Jar is incredible. It follows a young woman who is really searching for herself and her purpose and trying to find self-value outside of her work, or in her work as well. It's about her trying to grapple with her own identity, her own mental health, her own status as a writer, and also as a woman, and also as a human. And it hurts. It's really, really heartbreaking, but it's a beautiful novel. I cannot recommend it enough. So good. Next is a 2023 release that I was lucky enough to be sent an early copy of. That is One Woman Show by Christine Colson. So this book is very, very unique, and I highly recommend reading it, and it won't take you a whole lot of time. It is only around 220 pages, I think. What's really special about this novel, though, is that it is told entirely in the museum art labels that are printed throughout a museum. Now, it's fictitious. These paintings aren't real as far as I know, but basically it follows this woman's life, and it's almost as if you're walking through a museum looking at these portraits of this woman as she grows up, and you're reading about the painting. And each page is exactly that. It tells you, like, this is telling you when it was written, it's a still life, what it was written with, and it tells you the details of what's going on in the novel. And there is a story here. It's not nonfiction, it's not real, it's just this woman's story told in an incredibly unique way. And the reason I said that I think you should read it, even if you're not sure about it, is because it takes no time at all. I think the audiobook for this is like 1 hour and 20 minutes. So it's over 200 pages, but it won't take you any time whatsoever. This is a very unique read, and I definitely recommend checking it out. Next up is a classic, Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God. I have not read this book since high school, but this is another one that I'm definitely due for a reread on. It is about a Black woman living in America in, I think, the 1920s, perhaps, or maybe it's even before that. I can't remember exactly the time period, but it follows her throughout her life as she goes through these 3 marriages, and it's really a story about her wanting to live for herself, outside of all of these expectations and restrictions and social norms, which, given the fact that she is an African-American woman and the time period that this is set in, she definitely has a lot of opposition and challenges. This is an incredibly foundational work for literature, not just for stories about African-Americans and their experience, but this is such an important novel and one that is well worth your time if you somehow have not read this book yet. Next, we have a fantasy story that is a classic to a lot of people, and that is A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. I really like this cover. It's very messy, but I think it's really cool and very detailed, and I have matching copies of the other books in the series. So yeah, this is a fantasy novel. It's very like Fableistic. It's the story of Ged as he becomes this young wizard and gains power and trains and learns a lot about himself. It is very Fableistic though, like I said, in that it's kind of sparse on detail, but in a way that still paints this really vivid picture and allows your mind to like fill in a lot of the details. It's one that I didn't love as much as I thought I would upon first read, but I've thought about it a lot over the years, and it's one that I definitely do want to come back to, and it is so beloved. If you want a fantasy book that is the start to a series, is very short, but is foundational to the genre, definitely check out A Wizard of Earthsea. Next up is a short story collection called Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri. This won the Pulitzer Prize, I think in like 2001 or maybe 2000, and it is absolutely stunning. This contains probably my favorite short story of all time. If not my favorite, then definitely one of my favorites. It's the first story in it, actually. So I have read this whole collection once, and I've read the first story, A Temporary Matter, like 3 or 4 times. It is incredible, moving, powerful, important, full of so much depth. I love Interpreter of Maladies. Highly recommend this short story collection. Next, we have The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon. This is a weird one, and I don't know if you'll like it. I don't, because Thomas Pynchon is not for everyone, and I'm not even 100% convinced that he's for me. I have read this book by him, and I own like 4 or 5 others because I want to read his works, but he is very, very different. That's one way of putting it, I guess. He's like a postmodern author who really just doesn't give a crap about narrative structure or typical storytelling. He tells the story he wants to tell, and while there's a narrative here, it's one that is meandering and is a little bit hard to decipher at times, but yeah, it is a very interesting read, I will tell you that much, and it's one that definitely, I think, deserves a reread. Like I said, I read it this year, and I think about it a lot, but I don't necessarily know that I love it, but I liked it. That's all I can say about it. Next is a novel that is a little bit divisive, but it has definitely gotten a lot of attention as the film adaptation for this book just released on Netflix. The book I'm speaking of is Leave the World Behind by Rumaan Alam. I love this book. I read it back in July when I found out that there was an adaptation coming, and on Goodreads, this has like a 3.18 or something like that, so it's pretty low for Goodreads. But I loved this book. Maybe it's because I had kind of low expectations coming into it, but I thought that this book was really fascinating. It tells the story of this family that goes on vacation to this house that they're renting. It's kind of like a Airbnb or what have you. And they are trying to disconnect from all of the influences of their everyday life. The mother of the family is like a workaholic. She's very focused on her job. She's very successful and very passionate about her work. And she's kind of struggling to separate that from her life. And on top of that, there are struggles in her and her husband's marriage. She's having a hard time relating to her children. There's just a lot of stuff going on in their family dynamics. And then the owners of the house come and say, something is going on, the phones are down, something terrible has happened, we need to be here. And so they come back to the home, and these two families, one of which is white and one of which is black, have to learn to interact with each other in this situation that has arisen. And this book is really crazy. It's a bit ambiguous in that it doesn't necessarily give you a whole lot of detail about what is going on or what has happened, but it's more about the anxieties of modern life and the need to feel connected to social media and to technology, and what happens to people when they're separated from that, and these dividing lines between class and race and so many different things. This book is so deep. I love this book. I feel like I've talked about this book a lot longer than any of the other books, and maybe that says something, so definitely check it out. Next up is the only book that is over 250 pages, so I am cheating a little bit by including it, but it's like 258 pages, and it's a graphic novel. That book is Nimona by N.D. Stevenson. I read this early this year, and I was so delighted to have read it. And the reason I read it is because there's a Netflix movie that has come out, and I haven't watched the movie yet. I'm really bad about watching movie adaptations, even though I read the books for them to watch them. But anyway, that's not the point. This is just so much fun, and that's why I've included it. Even though it's technically over 250 pages, it'll take you no time at all to read because it is a graphic novel, but it is a delightful fantasy sci-fi kind of story about this hero and this villain and this sidekick named Nimona, who has these really interesting kind of like shape shape-shifting powers. She really wants to be a bad guy, so she joins this evil villain to try to topple the good guy, but there's a lot more going on there than meets the eye at first. And so this is a really funny book. It's a really moving book. I love this graphic novel. Highly recommend. Speaking of books I highly recommend, we have We Are the Light by Matthew Quick. This book made my top 10 or 15 or what have you of 2022, and it would make my list on 2023 if I read it this year too. I love We Are the Light so much. Matthew Quick is one of my favorite authors. I've read all of his novels, and this is probably my favorite book by him. This book is set in a small town that has gone through an intense, awful tragedy in the months preceding this book, and our main character Lucas was very much involved in the things that happened, not in a bad way, but he was there, and so he is seen in a certain light by the community, and he doesn't really understand how to act in that light. And on top of that, he is grappling with the loss of his wife, who passed away as a result of some of the things that happened in the town. So this is a really heartbreaking novel. There are a lot of triggers for it, so if you have any questions about those, please feel free to ask. But it's beautiful. It is about loss, it's about grief, it's about hope, it's about humanity, it's about community, it's about healing. I don't know what else to say about this book. I adore it. Next is another short story collection that is Someone Who Will Love You in All Your Damaged Glory. This is by Raphael Bob Waxberg. I think he's the creator of BoJack Horseman. So what else do you need to know? This is a really fun, but also really surprisingly deep and thoughtful short story collection. A lot of these stories are like sci-fi or magical realism or what have you, but there's just so much going on here. This book is wild, it is fun, it is moving, it is a lot of different things, and it is full of surprises, I'll say that much, so highly recommend this book. Next we have a nonfiction pick, that is Why Fish Don't Exist by Lulu Miller. So this is one of the nonfiction books that I read in 2022, and I think it is a great gateway into nonfiction. It's not very long, like I said, I think it's only like around 220 pages, and it's a lot of different things. So it's kind of a science book, it's kind of a memoir, it's kind of a self-help book in some ways. It's a lot of different stuff, and I think that it has something in it for everyone, and it is also incredibly engaging. I had a hard time putting this down when I was reading it, and it's one that I've thought about many times over the past year and a half since I read it. If you are new to nonfiction, or you've read a lot of nonfiction and you haven't read this one, highly recommend Why Fish Don't Exist. It's a weird one, but you'll like it. Next up, we have a returning author to the list. He was featured in my last 20 books that I recommended, and he's featured now, and he'll probably be featured with everything he ever writes, because I love Caleb Azumah Nelson, the author of Small Worlds. This book came out this year, and it is one of my most anticipated releases of 2023, and it definitely did not let me down. Caleb Azumah Nelson is one of the most poetic and beautiful writers of our time. Everything he writes is like spun from gold. I don't know what to tell you. If you want a novel that has beautiful writing, please read this book. It is about a young man coming of age over a series of summers. It's about the different relationships in his life, not necessarily just romantic, but also like his relationships with his father, his brothers, his community. It's also his relationship with music. There's so much to this story, and every word is just perfectly placed. I love Nelson's writing. So good. Then we have Child of God by Cormac McCarthy. I recommend this book lightly, not because it is not amazing, because it is, but because, oh my gosh, this book is so disturbing. I don't know if it's technically horror, but it sure feels like it. I'm not really going to tell you a whole lot about this book, just because I think it's kind of interesting if you go in blind. I will say it's about an outcast on the edge of society and the things that he gets up to. And I'll leave it at that. So if you have a strong stomach, check it out. Then we have The Drop by Dennis Lehane. I love Dennis Lehane's books so much. I've read, I think, 4 or 5 of his books now, and I've loved all of them. The Drop is a really great book. I haven't watched the film yet. Have you noticed a trend? But The Drop is really short, so it's definitely a really great gateway into Dennis Lehane's books. And it's about this man who is kind of down on life. He doesn't really know what he wants for himself. I think he's a bartender. And one day he's getting off of work and he finds this puppy in a trash can that has been abandoned, and he takes in the puppy, and it's about their relationship, but also the terrible owner of that puppy from before finds out that this guy has the dog and he wants it back, and he is not a good person, and it's about everything that happens after that. This book is really crazy. It's like a mystery for sure, but there's a lot of heartwarming moments too. It's full of shocks, full of love, full of pain. It's really, really great. If you've never read anything by Dennis Lehane, I highly recommend his books. He wrote Mystic River, Shutter Island, a handful of other books as well, but this is a great place to start if you haven't read any of his books before. Next is a YA book that also got a movie adaptation this year that I haven't watched yet. Great. That book is Landscape with Invisible Hand by M.T. Anderson. This book is so fascinating and it's so wickedly smart. This book is about Earth after aliens have arrived, and they are a higher life form of aliens, and essentially they derive enjoyment off of watching human interactions, off of, like, they treat human lives like television, and so people can get paid to broadcast their relationships and whatever they have of value that they do that can be seen as entertainment for the alien life forms. They can be paid to broadcast that. And so it's about this couple, this teenage couple that creates this broadcast of their romance. It is so full of social commentary. It is wild. It is so deep for a young adult novel with some really intense themes, and I mean, this book is really, really great. I think everyone should read it. I can't say that I fully loved the book itself, but I really loved a lot of the things that it was saying and doing and its originality, and I cannot wait to watch this movie when I finally get around to it. Next up, we have Apartment by Teddy Wayne. This is a book that I wanted to read for quite some time, and I just read it a few weeks ago, and I really enjoyed it. We follow an unnamed protagonist who is in a graduate school writing program, and it's set in the 90s, and he really wants to be this amazing writer, but he's just not. And so in his class, he tries his best, but he feels like he's not getting fulfillment, like he's not doing a good enough job, until he befriends a new student who is new to New York, which is where this book is set. And this person is an amazing writer with no connections. And so he takes him in, they become friends, they become roommates, and it's about all of the complicated feelings that arise from that. I think that this book is really fantastic. I think it's for fans of literary fiction, for people who like a New York setting, academic setting. It's really, really great. I don't know why people don't talk about this more, because Apartment by Teddy Wayne is a really fantastic novel. Next up, we have The Builders by Daniel Polanski. This book is so cool. If you ever read Redwall as a kid, which I totally did, I was obsessed with Redwall. It's like that, but grimdark, in that we have protagonists and characters and villains that are all animals, but they act like humans, but they're still like mice and otters and squirrels and what have you. But it's very dark, very action-packed, so much fun. I would love to read like a whole series set in this world, but this is the only book that's out so far. It's about like this gang of I don't want to say they're thieves. They might be thieves. I can't quite remember. But they have broken up the band basically, and it's about them coming back together for this last mission. It's so good. It is so good. It's a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. If that sounds fun to you, read it, because it's exactly what it sounds like. You know exactly what you're getting coming into it, and it's really good. Then we have Nocturnes by Kazuo Ishiguro. I love Kazuo Ishiguro. I have now read, I think, 3 of his books, and all of them were fantastic. If you've heard of him, he is the author of Never Let Me Go. That's his most popular book, but he also has The Remains of the Day, which is my personal favorite book by him. But Nocturnes is a collection of short stories. I think it's 5 stories, and it's about music and the night. And all the stories, those are the 2 things that all the stories have in common. There's a musical aspect and it's a night aspect. And these stories are so beautiful. Some of them are really subtly heartbreaking, just as Kazuo Ishiguro does masterfully in everything he writes. And others are really shocking as well. There's some romantic stories in here. There's a lot of stuff for everyone, I think. So if you wanted to try out this author, there's some really fantastic stories in this collection. I definitely recommend it. Alright, so those are all 20 of the books that I'm recommending to you in this video. As promised, here are my top 5 of those. First up, we have Leave the World Behind. I feel like that was obvious. I talked about it so much. We Are the Light by Matthew Quick. I can't talk about this book without gushing, so there you have it. The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. How could that not be in my favorites of this video? Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri. Again, like my favorite short story of all time there at the beginning. And lastly, we have The Drop by Dennis Lehane, because I love Dennis Lehane. I just do. Thank you again so much for watching. Let me know in the comments if you're going to read any of these books in the next few weeks, or if you've already read some of these and you really enjoyed them like I did, or if you hope to read some of these next year. I would love to hear from you. And again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.